Action. Now that we're recording, we'll go silent.
Yeah, that's right. Get rid of all the banter.
Yes. I think, Andy, whenever you want to kick us off, I think we're good to go.
Yeah, let's go for it. All righty. Well, welcome, folks. This is the first one of 3 winter Zoom clinics that we're gonna do. I'd like to thank Kyle and Andrew for bringing us the great content for this one. A little bit about Zoom protocol for this. As you can see, we've locked down all the muting and video and all of that just to manage the crosstalk and make this a little more efficient. So hopefully you've submitted your questions ahead of time so that we can have really well thought out answers. But if you do just thrive on putting people on the spot with trick questions, you can put those in the chat. And we'll be monitoring that to make sure we keep an eye on it. With that, I think go ahead and hand it over to Kyle and Andrew, and I'm gonna just listen up and hope to learn something.
All right. Andrew, do you want to go or?
Yeah, I'm Andrew. For those of you that know me, I'm on the Marymore board. We if those of you on our Discord group, we were doing some squat tobering in October and having a lot of fun. And I think Kevin was the one who brought up, man, it would be great if we had a strength clinic as part of our Zoom clinics. And I am coached by Kyle in the gym, and I said, Kyle, is this something you'd be interested in doing with us? And he said yes. So that's why we're all here today, to learn a little bit more about strength and conditioning and how we can all be a little bit stronger and faster and quick twitchier.
That's the technical term.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously I'm Kyle and working with Andrew through this. I had actually just given a presentation last week at Bare Bones for those who didn't make it on this sort of idea. And so it was convenient timing that I get to talk about strength and cycling back-to-back weekends. My presentation last week was a little bit different than this one, given that Andrew has conveniently gotten a lot of questions through the questionnaire through the Google form. So I think that's where I'm going to focus most of my time. I'm going to go through a little bit of my presentation before because I want to talk a little bit about philosophy. But there's a lot of good questions, and I want to kind of spark a bit of a discussion here. So with that, I'm going to just share my screen and kind of start plowing through some of my slides. I'm going to breeze through some other ones. And then again, I want to get onto those questions. So give me a second here. And all right, you guys can see this. We're good. Thumbs up. Yeah. Sweet. All right. So as stated, my name's Kyle. I'm the owner and head coach here at Speed Mechanics in Victoria, BC. I've put up some branding there for some of our middle school, high school, and collegiate athlete programs, as well as our Gen Pop programs. We've also opened up our clinical health center continuum. So not only do we have a gym and training facility, but we also run a physio clinic alongside that in an integrated manner. Brief history on myself, just for a little brief history here. So my sporting background was hockey, and then into speed skating, and then into track cycling. Much later in life, I didn't find track cycling until I was about 25. While I was doing that, I was also going through school, doing my undergrad here at the University of Victoria in kinesiology, and then worked as a kin and strength coach for a few years before I would decide to go back to school for a master's in exercise science based in strength and conditioning. And that was at Edith Cowan University in Australia. I did that via distance while I was working at Simon Fraser University as an intern, working predominantly with the football, swimming, and men's and women's soccer. I also worked at Vancouver College, which is an all-boys school in Vancouver, with their track and field program. After that, I moved to St. FX University in Nova Scotia, where I was the head strength coach there for a couple years, before moving back home to Victoria, where the pandemic hit shortly afterwards. And then out of that, I opened up Speed Mechanics in 2020. And 2 years later, we've now opened up the physio clinic and expanded our facility. So that's where I'm at now. And through that cycling experience, both as a rider and then as a strength coach, that's kind of how I met Andrew and Amara years ago. So from that, I want to go into my philosophy a little bit, talk about what that looks like, and then move into velocity-based training, just touching on that a little bit. And then I want to get into the questions, because I think that's actually really where the takeaways are going to come from. Again, a lot of great questions posed here. So I want to make sure that we can touch on all of those. So my philosophy around strength training, oftentimes it's looked at as a reductionist approach. So what I mean by that is we break the body down into its component parts, and we look at muscles as only, biceps does this, or triceps is doing this. And we look at just the individual muscles rather than how are they working together. What do we need? What are joint angles? We have to look at the body as a whole and as a complex system. And each individual athlete is its own complex system and interacts with its environment in a specific way. And so we have to look at what affects everybody within their training, and that is going to create kind of the base for the training plan. So when we look at factors affecting performance, obviously we're here to talk about training as the primary, but it's not limited to only training. As we know, sleep, nutrition, recovery and restoration, those all affect training, and those are things that we often associate with training. But outside of that, our social life, our school, work, life balance, our mental health, which is becoming a hotter topic these days, and then our environment, how we interact with, whether it's cold outside, whether it's raining, seasonality. There's a number of environmental factors that are going to play into how we show up to training on any given day. So when we look at training and our bodies and how that works, the big primary driving factor is our central nervous system, or our CNS. And we can look at that as a battery. And all of the activities that we do through a day are either going to help to facilitate recharging that battery, or are going to take away and drain the battery. So we can help to strengthen the battery. We can help to make it better or give it more power by stimulating it enough, which is going to cause drainage. And then by doing things to help our recovery, we recharge it so that we can go again. And that is what is going to drive our adaptation. So when we look at our activities, we can start to think about categorizing our activities in training as high, medium, and low intensity. And they're gonna all play differently on our nervous system. Low days, facilitating that recovery and regeneration. It helps to build our work capacity. And then the high days are what is going to drive our strength, power, and our speed. That's our output. So on those days, we want to make sure that we're focused on that sort of activity. And then on the recovery days, it doesn't mean off, but it means that we're going to strategically input things that are going to help to facilitate that recovery. Excuse me. So when we start to look at classifying activities, on high days, we're looking at things that are very much high speed, high force, or very fatiguing. These sorts of things are going to require 48 to 72 hours recovery. So we can't put them on back-to-back days. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but you have to be very careful when you do that sort of thing and really think it out. So when we look at these sort of high intensity activities, things like sprinting, bounds, that would be like high intensity plyometrics, explosive jumps, heavy weights. Excuse me, I'm dying over here. Heavy weights, so things over 80% 1RM, or when we start talking about velocity-based training, things that are we use velocity-based training to move with intention. So it's going to be very fast. It may not be that heavy, but it's going to be fast. So that is why it's included here. Explosive med ball throws. And then for our endurance athletes, maximal conditioning, things in zone 4 and 5. We include zone 4 and 5 because it's extremely taxing, both psychologically and physiologically on the body, but the speeds are low. But because of that extra stress, we have to include it on these sort of high intensity days to make sure that the body is able to recover for subsequent workouts. So when we move to the low intensity exercises, it's essentially the opposite. We're looking at low force, low speed. 1 second. Oh man, sorry, I don't know why I'm coughing so much, but we're looking at low force, low speed, low stress, low fatigue. These sorts of activities are really to help increase blood flow to the muscles, help to increase nutrient absorption, and help to prepare us for our next high intensity session. So these sorts of things are like GPP circuits, which is general physical preparation. So really more higher rep sort of circuits. These are going to be more single joint activities. You could think of them as sort of smaller muscle groups, not the big compound movements. You can use big compound movements in these circuits, but generally it's more the single joint accessory type movements. Weights in those bigger movements under 80% and not moving with intention. So you're just moving load for the sake of moving load and getting, again, blood flow and some stimulation, but it's a recovery focus. On the bike, we're thinking coffee shop rides or zone 2 work. This is our more aerobic focus. And then med ball circuits and core work would be included in this as well. Even though things might feel hard, they're not neurologically taxing. On the other side, or in between those, is our medium intensity classification. So Charlie Francis was the one who actually coined the high-low philosophy. For those not familiar with Charlie Francis, he was a Canadian track and field coach, infamous for coaching Ben Johnson, who raced Carl Lewis back in the '88 Olympics. This was his training methodology. It's been since adapted multiple times by various coaches, but it's kind of a general foundation. So again, he coined the medium intensity as sort of 76 to 94% of maximum sprint speed. But we want to look at this as that sort of in between medium intensity work. It's that no man's land that's not going to help us get stronger or faster, but it's neurologically taxing enough that it's too difficult to recover from in 24 hours. So we have to include it or incorporate it into medium or into our high intensity days because we need more than 24 hours to recover from it. So I've got CrossFit up as a picture here because it's kind of a prime example of it's not generally heavy. It's heavy enough, but it's just a lot of work done over a certain amount of time. And again, it's too taxing to recover from. So just a general quick summary of adaptations that are happening at the high intensity, medium intensity, and low intensity workloads. So generally high intensity, medium intensity, we're trying to stimulate that sort of fight or flight mechanism. And then the low intensity, we're trying to stimulate more of the parasympathetic and the rest and recover side of our nervous system. So then I mentioned velocity-based training. This is something that I use with Andrew as well as a number of my other athletes, both in-house and by a distance. So velocity-based training is a way that we can elicit a specific training adaptation by looking at bar speed and how fast an athlete moves specific loads. So some of you might be familiar with the percentage-based training method, which is simply taking a percentage of your 1 rep max and prescribing that. So a common thing might be, 5 sets of 5 back squat at 75% of your 1 rep max. So instead of doing that, I might look at prescribing a velocity zone and say that Andrew is going to do that 5x5 with a velocity zone of 0.6 to 0.8 meters per second. I'm going to go over what those zones look like shortly, but that might be the prescription instead of taking an absolute percentage. So I would use this as a form of allowing the athlete to utilize auto-regulation. And what auto-regulation is the athlete can regulate themselves based on what their nervous system is outputting or able to output on any given day. So it allows each athlete to progress at their own individual rate because every athlete is going to respond to training and their environment a little bit differently, even prescribing the exact same workload or training load. Every athlete's going to respond differently. So where someone might be ready to go for that training session and their nervous system is primed, ready, they might be able to lift more that session versus somebody else might be down on that session, even having done the same training the prior, week or 2 weeks or month. And so this allows each athlete to continue to adapt at their own pace, which in turn is going to reduce the risk for injury. So we're not redlining constantly. So when we look at velocity-based training, we actually look at the science behind it. Barbell velocity is very strongly related to your 1 rep max. For those in the science realm, having an R-squared value of 0.97 to 0.99 is very, very strongly correlated to each other. So we can assume that the velocity is indicative of their 1 rep max on any given day. Research has shown that your 1 rep max can actually fluctuate plus or minus 18% on any given day. And that's just based off of your general nervous system fluctuations. So your daily ups and downs. So for those that have ever gone into the weight room and felt that, this load that I've done a bunch of times before feels really heavy today, that's when your 1 rep max on that day is closer to, you know, if I gave you 80% on that day, then this is going to feel more like 90, 98% if we're on that plus 18. And then if I gave you 80% and it feels super light that day, we've all had those days as well where it feels like you can lift the world, then that's where it's at that minus 18% or somewhere in between, right? So that's like 62%. So if I'm trying to program an 80% day, then I'm trying to get a general strength stimulation off of or out of that athlete, right? So if it's 62%, I'm not going to get a strength adaptation out of that athlete. It's too easy for them. But if I get it, but if it's 98% that day, then that athlete is going to come out of that feeling extremely fatigued, probably failed where they shouldn't be failing, and that's going to have a negative effect on their psyche for that day and probably the rest of the training week. For some athletes, that can carry on even longer than that. But by using velocity, I can prescribe a specific zone and just say, stay in this zone, knowing that they're going to get a strength adaptation out of it. So if I look at these sort of zones here and say, I want them to get a strength adaptation, I may say, we're going to sit in 0.5 to 0.75 meters per second. And I know that as long as they're in that zone, we're going to get a strength adaptation out of them. It's going to feel hard. It's going to feel heavy. But if their nervous system, regardless of whether their nervous system is up or down, if it's up, they're going to just keep adding load because they're going to be moving faster than this zone. So we're going to keep adding load until they get into that zone, and then they're going to sit in that zone at that load. If their nervous system is down for that day, then we're going to take load off, and we'll see this in the warm-up sets, because normal weights will have sort of standardized weights will have an idea of how fast on average they move. So if they're not hitting the speeds that they're supposed to be hitting on those warm-up sets, then the weight's going to be lighter and they're going to sit in that zone. If they were using weights that they were using the previous week and they're below this training zone, then we know it's too heavy, right? So we're going to back off load. Now there's obviously that can hurt the ego in itself, but it's something that athletes hopefully get used to at some point. But maybe we don't necessarily get used to them. But you can still learn to check your ego at the door and go, yeah, okay, this is for the better of my training over time. I have trouble with it. I can see Andrew smiling, so I know he's had trouble with it at a time. And seeing some of the other names in here, I'm sure they've had some troubles with it over time as well. So these speed zones here, we look at something called the force velocity curve. And this is what we're trying to train. And essentially, we're trying to take this graph and move it up and to the right to increase training, the training adaptations. So when we look at sort of the max strength zone up at 90 to 100%, this is going to be like our absolute strength here at less than 0.5 meters per second. As we start to move down the curve towards strength speed, this is still relatively heavy, but we can create a lot of volume, or a lot more volume at this sort of load, and get a strength or strength power effect out of it. As we move down the curve, things are getting lighter and we're moving generally faster. So if I go back here, now we're starting into the strength speed and even getting into the speed strength part of the curve as we get down here. So generally, I'm going to sit in this sort of like 0.75 to 1.0 meters per second in that power, in a power phase. So here we're moving moderate loads a lot faster. And the goal is speed, speed, speed. So I might use like bands to help facilitate that, or to push into some extra resistance so that the athlete can learn to accelerate through specific loads. And then as we go down the curve here, we start to get towards more like sprinting in your plyometrics down at this part of the curve. And even though on bike, it's a little bit different than a lot of our land-based athletes, where sprinting on foot, these sorts of ranges are really important. I still think it's important for jumps on the bike and being able to elicit power and turn things on really quickly. So I like to use potentiating complexes, which I'll probably get into a little bit more based off of some of the questions that I saw on what this end of the curve looks like. But hopefully that gives you a sense on the force velocity curve and what we're trying to do. And we want to kind of touch on all of these aspects in a well-rounded program on high days to, again, move this up and to the right. So again, just another look at the force velocity curve here and what that looks like. So one thing with by using a velocity measure, we can essentially pull the reins on ourselves, whether you're using it yourself and just looking at your velocity on any given day, or whether you're working with a coach. And as the coach, I can help to keep my athletes focused on what the intention is and give them something else to chase outside of load. Load is one thing, but moving with intention and learning to move fast is so important on the track, whether you're endurance or a sprinter. Obviously sprinting, it makes a ton of sense, but from an endurance side of things, when you got to go, you got to go when the train goes, or the somebody tries to make a breakaway, or depending on the race, if you're in elimination and you got to get up and around, right? Like, you've got to make your move when it's there. And so learning to move with intention is learning to put full effort in as fast as possible, which is what all sports come down to. So something that was interesting with VBT was looking at volume. So looking at how much do we need to actually do in the weight room to get a training effect. There's one study, actually there's been multiple studies with velocity drop. And so we look at in one set, you'll use a specific load. And once the velocity drops 40% from your first rep to whenever your last rep is, when it drops 40%, and then another group did till 20%. Once that rep dropped, that last rep dropped below 20% or 40%, then the set was done. The 40% drop did about double the volume, which makes sense. But afterwards, they found no difference in strength gains. So essentially, the 20% group was able to do less volume and still come out equally as strong as the group that did more volume, which we're sort of taught in like general or pop media that we should do more work, right? It's all about more work. So the idea here is that we're able to do half the work, but still get the same benefits out of it. So this is something that you can easily play with and track with a velocity measure. They've also done this study with German volume training, which I've had that question asked multiple times. If you're not familiar with GVT, that is doing 10 sets of 10 reps, basically till failure each time. So you just obliterate yourself and then can't walk out of the gym. So with that, they did a study looking at 10 by 10 and 5 sets of 10, again, half the volume, same strength gains, except the 10 by 10 group ended up mostly injured by the end of the study. So this is something where we want to think about training not only smarter, but effectively You can still train hard, but you can train smarter in how you choose to set up your program. So that's what we talk about minimum effective dose, is like, how much do we need to do to get that maximum benefit out of what we're doing? We don't need to kill ourselves every single time, but we do need to hit a minimum threshold to get that adaptation that we're looking for. So getting into some of the nuts and bolts around exercise selection here. I'm just bringing up some of the questions because we're going to start to get into those. One I often get asked is like, what's the best exercise for cyclists, or insert whatever activity here? And there's no magic exercise. They're all tools in a toolbox, and you can't build a house with a hammer only. So it's more about consistency. It's about showing up and doing the work over time. That's going to get you the results that you want, versus squats are the best, or deadlifts are the best, or sumo deadlifts are stupid and regular deadlifts are the best. They're all tools in a toolbox, and you have to understand the why and why you're using them, but there's no magic bullet. And with that, there's no bad exercises as well. Again, I get some people that are hard lined on specific exercises being right based off of bodybuilding.com or whatever, insert social media. And I've had some athletes make fun of me for putting in sumo deadlifts, but I use them for a change in stimulus, for a change in environment, as well as just hitting muscles in a different angle and position. So again, building a more robust athlete requires more experience and a broader range of experience, essentially. And so with this, I mean, you guys can see the rest of these points here. I want to take this time to actually start to get into some of these questions a little bit more.
There was one in the chat real quick of what kind of tools do we use for measuring velocity?
Perfect. I missed that slide, so I will go back to that. Uh-oh. Bear with me here. Too many slides. Sorry for making anyone dizzy. Tools for measuring velocity. So we've got multiple different kinds here. Can you guys see my mouse? If I'm moving it, yeah?
Yeah, that's coming through.
Yeah, we got it.
Perfect. So we've got GymAware, Smart Coach. Most of these Tendo unit, Tendo's the original, or one of the originals. They're all string based. So it's a string that attaches to the bar and then wraps around a spool inside this little computer. And then as that spool unwinds, it measures how fast it's unwinding and then projects that into an app. So most all of them are attached to or associated with an app that you can have on your phone or tablet. Or GymAware is unfortunate because they only use Apple, the iPads, or this particular unit does. They have a new unit that's more cost effective for the general public, and I believe that hooks up to your phone, so that's a nice one. Push band is what Andrew uses, but this is a Canadian product that was recently bought out by Whoop. It is a sensor that you can wear on your arm or attach to the bar via Velcro, and it is essentially an accelerometer, gyroscope, and magnetometer within this little sensor. It's about the size of a credit card and about the thickness of your phone, maybe a little less, and that just velcros to the bar. And so again, it connects wirelessly to your phone. This A2P is the bar sensei. It is also similar to push, There's a few other ones as well that are like inertial motion units that are wireless. This Form one is a bar clip. So just clips and holds your weight on the barbell. All of these, again, they have their own apps that work well. Some of them have been tested. It's become really easy to throw these on the market with very little testing behind them. So validity and reliability are extremely important here. And again, most of them, it's way too cheap to put them out. And the research doesn't necessarily support most of them. Tendo's your best one. It's the gold standard. GymAware is also a gold standard, but they're both expensive and typically used by teams or like training centers. Push is going to be no more as of next year in September 2023. So from there, you've got some of these little encoders. Speed for Lifts is decent. Open Barbell is a decent one. They're all about $300 US. They're quite small and can travel with you wherever you're going, so they easily fit into your backpack and you can take them anywhere. Assess to Perform is fairly solid and similar to Push. And then there's another one that I can't remember off the top of my head now, but it's a European one. So these are sort of how you measure velocity. There are some that are coming out soon. I think it's Metric VBT is another one, and it's based off of your phone and the camera on your phone. So high-speed motion capture is another gold standard in measurement. Those systems are extremely expensive, but they're starting to produce apps now on your phone. They're not really reliable or valid just yet. They're only on the first iteration. And so they're trying to get the tracking algorithm a little bit better. So I wouldn't recommend them just yet, but probably within the next year, there'll be an app on your phone that'll be super easy and way cheaper to use. So rather than a $300 entry point, it might be, the cost of an app. So, or they'll make you spend something on the back end for software. Does that answer the question for measuring tools?
Yeah, I think it does. And I was talking with some people at the Burnaby Clinic, and I definitely attributed this of like, you wouldn't go do a track session without a cadence sensor. Like you wouldn't go to the gym without something like this. Like you could, but like you're not going to get the best out of your workout unless you have something to measure your actual performance of what you're doing.
100%. That's a really good comparison. You've got your cadence sensor. If you're lucky enough, you got a power meter, but there's something to measure on the bike. Same thing in the gym. It's not just weight on the bar. It's more to it than that. So if we're good there, I'm going to look at this first question here. So I'll read it out. I've got, what's the right balance for strength work once we get into heavy on the bike training / racing? In context, this is for an enduro focused racer. So the right balance of strength work, once you get into heavy on bike work, is very dependent on what your heavy on bike work looks like. And even for an endurance focused racer, there should still be an emphasis, like a smaller emphasis off the bike in the weight room, just for durability and even still in increasing strength for performance. So it's going to be 1 to 2 times a week, more than likely. And that's going to be dependent on your race schedule, your travel schedule, what level you're at, how old you are, as well as how much training you did off the bike in the off season. So if you did nothing and you jump into the season and now you're going to start up a strength program, that's probably not the smartest way to do it. But you could get away with once a week at that point, and that's going to be enough of a stimulus to see adaptation through the season. The big thing is strength training through the season for an endurance focused athlete is so important in maintaining those watts and maintaining your power by the end of the season. So yes, you'll notice a difference at the beginning of the season, but there's a good chance that the other high performers were also strength training, but they may have stopped at the start of the season. So as you go further and further into the season, if you're continuing to do it in a smart manner, so that you're taking into account the rest of your training, you're going to see the benefits come nationals or come whatever the final race of your year is, versus those that stopped earlier. They're going to see a continual decrease in power output throughout the year, even though they may still be doing a lot of on bike stuff. It's not a big strength stimulus. They're going to have that aerobic stimulus. They're going to have the anaerobic component to it, but the strength isn't there, and their durability is going to decrease through the year. So little niggly injuries may start to creep in throughout the season. Does it, if the person that asked that question is on, how does that sound? Like, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that was me who asked that question. So, and I think that addresses it really well. The piece I was sort of thinking about, and I'm glad you went through that portion at the start, sort of laying out the philosophy and sort of, wasn't sure if there was like maintenance things that could be done that wouldn't tire me out enough that I need to recover, that would still be worth doing, essentially. And it's because I'm always trying to play catch up.
Yeah, so there's certainly things that you can keep doing on the bike that will significantly help you, but your volume should be less than what you were doing in the off season, but you still want to maintain that intensity. You're not maximally lifting, but you're still lifting relatively heavy, to make sure that you're getting enough of that sort of strength stimulus. It's just less than what it was in season, or out of season. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. This question I get asked all the time, and I think every strength coach does. How strong is strong enough? At what point do gains in the gym stop translating to speed on the bike? It's a good question. And how strong is strong enough? Most people aren't strong enough. So it's not usually something that you have to worry about, unless you're at the elite, like the elite level. Most of us could benefit from being stronger, but it's when do you chase it and when do you not chase it, I think, is more of a relevant question. So again, in the off season, certain times of even in season, you can keep trying to push that envelope, and then you're going to focus more towards power and more towards moving moderate loads or moderate heavy loads faster and faster. And I mean, now that gears are getting bigger and bigger, I think strength is more and more important in cycling, where 10-15 years ago there was a ceiling to how strong you needed to be. I think now, even on the endurance side of things, the enduros are pushing gears that we pushed in sprints 5 or 10 years ago, and the sprinters' gears are just ridiculous now. So strength is a huge factor, and that sort of strength speed side of things, if I go back to stupid thing. 1 second here. If I go back to this slide, we look at this sort of accelerative zone, even speed strength zone, kind of touching on this max strength zone. Absolute like 1 rep max speeds for an experienced lifter are going to be down to like 0.25 meters per second. So we still have even a pretty good chunk here. Like 0.5 is probably about 85% roughly. So we still have quite a bit of play in here within this 0.5 to 0.75. We're looking at about 70 to 85% 1 rep max, and then 70.75 to 1.0 we're looking at like 55% maybe to 70%. So from 1 meter per second on down, like there's a lot of play there that we can work with and work on moving loads within here just faster and faster. So a common one for back squat is 0.58 meters per second is roughly 80% max. So if the load that I'm moving at 0.58 meters per second continues to increase, then I know that I'm more powerful, and those gears and the ability to turn them are going to be better. So I don't have to necessarily chase 1 rep max strength through the season, but that gives me a sub-maximal load that I can continue to try to push that ceiling a little bit. Went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think that kind of addresses that.
Yeah, from like a personal anecdote side, like I found better results when I was training in that accelerative strength zone for like my on the bike performance than I was just trying to like chase a heavy number in the gym. So yeah, we can always be stronger, but correct training can make up for a lot of weakness.
Yeah. So you can, I think there's another one of the riders previously. I don't think they're on this call right now, but they mentioned the inconsistency of their squat when they went into the gym. They'd push the same load. Some days would be good, some days would be bad, but they were very inconsistent. And when they started to look at the velocity side of things, they started to move with more intention, and the strength went up. The 1 rep max went up. The on bike feeling, like Andrew's saying, it got better. They got faster. And so getting stronger is one thing, but how you use that strength, both in the weight room and on bike, is more what we're chasing rather than the absolute side of things. So if you're a weightlifter,
yeah. It was mentioned last week in Burnaby, and I think it's worth reiterating here that the velocity-based training systems where you have the app do a very good job of gamifying weightlifting to the point of, oh, hey, instead of just going through the motions in the gym today, we're sure I'm going to do a 5x5, maybe at the same weight, but I'm not necessarily thinking about moving with intention. I can say, okay, I need to be in this zone range every time. So every time I'm in the bottom of my squat, I'm going to push up as hard as I can to try to make sure I'm in that zone, and I'm always in that zone, and I'm lifting to the best that I can in that speed zone.
Exactly. That makes a big difference. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're athletes and we're not powerlifters. Not to say that they're not athletes, but their sport is 1 rep max. Weightlifters, same thing. Their sport is a maximum clean and jerk or maximum snatch. And our job is to use what we're doing in the gym to translate on the bike. So we're not chasing 1 rep max. Yeah, sometimes the prescription is you just need to be stronger. But once you get to a point, and for everybody, that's a little bit different. So yeah, we're trying to move load faster and faster and faster, and that's across the spectrum, just like that force velocity curve that we looked at earlier. Moving on to the next one. This is kind of playing into the same idea. What advice would you give to someone with a decent squat, 2 times body weight, and deadlift 2.5 times body weight? Same prescription. Move load faster. Once you're at that point, like, that's pretty good. You are at a point of diminishing returns, and again, your sport is not absolute strength. Your sport is absolute speed. And so yeah, you need to start moving that load faster. You're kind of at a prime point for VBT, really. So that would be my suggestion, is start looking into that, or working with someone, qualified coach that understands that. On to the next one. What stretching do you suggest as a component of your strengthening routine? That's always a tricky one, because everybody has their own issues as far as mobility goes. Some of it's going to be structural, i.e., your bones and joints are just what they are. And oftentimes I see people getting prescribed specific mobility exercises. Hamstrings are a common one for the sake of doing it, and it's not really the issue. Remember, in cycling, we have actually a very limited range of motion that we need to be good in. The crank arm is how much you need to, it's a very limited range of motion that you're moving within. Yes, you have to be in a tucked position on the bike, within the handle, or within your arrow position. And mobility is going to, help to a point, but specific stretching or stretching exercises are going to be so individual. I would suggest, doing some thoracic opening, so like upper back, and just doing some extension work. Generally cyclists have tight hips, so, and over dominant quads versus hamstrings. It's not necessarily a stretching issue. You can stretch until the cows come home, and it won't necessarily do anything. The actual effect that stretching has is very transient, in that it doesn't stick around long. So strength training will increase your mobility. That is unquestionable, based on the literature. But if you have specific issues or injuries, then you're going to want to work around that with specific mobility. But otherwise, we want to look at strengthening and getting into positions and loaded positions that we don't normally get into. And that's going to force a more consistent adaptation over time and increase joint ranges over time, versus simply just heaving or like reefing on a muscle to hopefully lengthen it. Those adaptations are fleeting. They last maybe 10 minutes, and then you're back to your normal position. So it can feel good. I'm not saying don't stretch. I'm not saying that that at all. Stretch if it feels good. But we can focus our time a little bit more on other things, like using weight to kind of push us into those joint ranges. So that probably opened more questions than it answered. But happy to take on more questions or start a discussion on that if anybody wants. Or any thoughts or ideas on that?
I'll keep monitoring the chat and let you know.
All right, cool. So the next one, I'd love to hear about any strength work that can be done without having access to heavy weights or squat rack. That is another good question that I get asked frequently. So strength and the idea of strength, I want to answer this in a helpful manner. Strength requires a basic threshold to change. And if you don't hit that threshold, it won't make you stronger. So a common example, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend a yogi in here, but people who do yoga, and yoga is fine if you like yoga. I'm not saying anything negative about yoga, but I often get told that I'm strong because I do yoga and I hold my body weight positions. Well, you're not, because there's this, again, you can hold your body weight very well to a point, and then you're not getting any stronger from that because there's no overload. There's a principle, the overload principle, which we're probably all familiar, or progressive overload principle, which we're probably all familiar with. And so if you're not progressively overloading the system, then you're not getting stronger. So if you don't have access to heavy weights, it's a tough thing to do, because that's how you overload things. Now there are ways to overload the system without heavy loads, but you can use plyometrics or jump training, because that is a high force just upon landing. You can use different hills to stimulate strength by pushing up the hill or jumping down the hill, because each time you land, you're coming from a height. And so that impact is going to stimulate strength adaptation, both in the musculature and the connective tissue, like your tendons. So that's one way to do it. The Russians used to do that all the time in like Soviet days. That was part of their training. They didn't use a lot of heavy loads, but they used what they call the shock method. And so they would drop off of higher and higher things to increase that adaptation. So they didn't gain a lot of muscle mass. Typically, like jumpers, like high jump, triple jump, long jump, and a lot of their like track and field athletes would use this sort of thing. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, if you don't have it, is if you have access to heavy gears on your bike, you can use your bike to stimulate that strength in a specific adaptation. It's limited as far as the exercises you can do, because you can either pedal forwards or you can pedal backwards.
And Andy wants to know, I'm assuming probably in jest, what if he keeps increasing his body weight?
Yes. Then your calves will get huge because you'll be getting calf raises with every step that you take. Yes, you'll get stronger. That's like Milos and the cow, or Milos and the bull. If you're not familiar with that story, then Milos was in ancient Greek time, lifted a baby calf on his back, and every day he continued to back squat the calf. As the calf aged, it became a bull, and by the time it was a bull, Milos was squatting a bull. So that's the idea of progressive overload. Be the same if you got bigger. I got a question here from Cam. Do you make use of a conjugate system in your programming as a way to address an athlete's explosive strength deficit, or do sprint efforts on the bike cover that off? Yes. For for those of you not familiar with the conjugate system, comes from Westside Barbell, and again, the Russians. Most of our training comes from the Russians in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Our training methodologies do. So the conjugate system, we're looking at max effort days, dynamic effort days. They also have submaximal repeated effort days. And so what he's asking is on some of those dynamic effort days, are we looking at using that sort of system to increase explosive strength, or do we just get explosive strength on the bike? The more specific you can make training, the more transferable it will be. However, for a newer individual, or to get just a general adaptation, doing things off the bike in that manner is going to elicit some adaptation and will have some transference. But of course, if you're working with a coach on the bike, they're going to have speed days that are specific to that are going to have a more specific adaptation to it. Off the bike, we're just trying to train general qualities. So again, it's essentially to sharpen the nervous system in either under maximum load or heavy loads, kind of like the max effort day in the conjugate system, or we're trying to elicit the body to contract and move faster, more explosively. So yes, we're going to do that in the gym. Yes, the hope is that it transfers on the bike, but your specific on bike work is also going to help that. So you know, I work with Andrew on his program, and so him and I chat about what he's doing on the bike. He's got his spreadsheet laid out, and so I have an idea of what his targets are for different training blocks, and then I adapt this strength program to fit what he's doing on the bike. Same with other coaches that I work with. You know, I know what block that they're in, and I'm going to build a training plan to help facilitate that. My job as a strength coach is filling gaps and facilitating the sport specific work that either the coach is doing, or in Andrew's case, he's his own coach. So I'm trying to help again fill those sort of gaps. So Cam, I hope that answers that question. Feel free to chime in if you want. No, cool, you're welcome. What else we got here? If you're going to be lifting in the morning, how much would you eat before a session versus eating after? It really depends on how much you can tolerate before you lift. Some people, some people can't eat before they lift, and I would suggest eating something so that you've got some sugar in you, and even a little bit of protein within that. But it really depends on how much time you have before the session. If you're waking up, you know, at 5 a.m. to do a 6 a.m. lift, you know, you've only got an hour there. I would keep it more carb focused and a little bit of protein, but not too heavy, enough to get you through the workout, and then focus on eating afterwards. Personally, when I trained through hockey or cycling or speed skating, cycling, we never usually had morning stuff except for on race day. But for speed skating and hockey, we often had early morning practices. And so I would eat enough to get through that, and then I'd have second breakfast afterwards. That's, again, you don't want to puke in practice or doing whatever you're doing. That never feels good. So it's something that you'll have to play with based off of your own schedule and how you feel during. So you'll know very quickly if you ate too much.
Second breakfast, the cornerstone of any sprint training program.
100%.
Austin in chat had a great question of, should velocity change during the season?
Yes. And no. So velocity will change somewhat, depending on, again, what the focus is for that day. So in the off season, I might program more towards the heavy end of the spectrum, and I might have more days that have or are geared towards the heavy end of the spectrum or the slower end of the spectrum. And then in season, we may cut down to only 2 training days a week off the bike. And that might be one that's kind of heavier focused, probably not super heavy, but 0.4 to 0.6 or 0.5 to 0.7, somewhere in there. And then I might have a faster focused day that's like 0.6 to 0.8, 0.7 to 0.9, even up to 1 meter per second, depending on what I'm trying to do and what the individual is racing, whether they're more endurance focused or whether they're more strength focused, or I guess more sprint focused. So it will change based on the time of year, and the density of those sessions will also change. So does that make sense?
For those that listen to the Marginal Gains podcast, that was a solid "it depends" answer.
Everything. When in doubt, it depends.
Do you want to go off the spreadsheet, or do you want to take another chat question?
Let's do another chat question.
Is doing 2 a day crazy? Being able to work in a nap between workouts make a difference?
I'm gonna read that again. Being able to work in a nap between workouts make a difference. You're gonna like it, but it depends. So if you can do 2 a days, in an ideal world, I would set up sprinting sessions. Say if I had a sprinting session on Monday, I would do my high intensity strength work on that Monday, and I would do my sprint work on Monday as well. I would generally aim to lead with my sprint work because that's the focus and that's the most important part. If I'm in the off season, it's less important. So I could do strength first, just depending on what I had access to. But I would have those 2 on the same day. And I would, if I was a napper, I would nap between those sessions. Personally, I've never been able to nap. Doesn't matter how hard I'm training. I just can't seem to nap. So I would go and do other things though through the day. So try to use my brain a little bit more in between sessions and just kind of change the stimulus or change like what side of the brain I'm using to help, I guess, in that regard. But yeah, if you can nap, absolutely take a nap. It will help the second training session and helping you feel fresh. Now, you're going to have to play with how long that nap is. Because if you take too long a nap, you're going to wake up groggy and then your training's going to suck afterwards because it's hard to get out of that funk. So you want it to be long enough that you get some rest, but not too long that you're just tired.
Yeah. From the sprinting track cycling coach side of things, I would definitely say that if you are doing any sort of technique focused session, you make sure you do that first. A great example of that is something like a standing start, because, if your legs are slightly shot from the gym, you're going to have crappy standing start technique, and then you're not going to be getting the most out of that specific workout. While if you're doing some sort of brain dead effort, like, a 20-second all out or 3-minute VO2 or something like that, where just turn the brain off and mash the pedals as hard as you can, like, yeah, that's a little less important to say like, oh, the strength should come first or the sprinting should come first. But if you're doing something technique focused, be it standing starts, making sure you're riding the black line for whatever time trial you're working on, I would say that is highly important to do before you do your strength training.
100% agree. Do you want to do another chat one, or?
We are all caught up for now.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed the chat one. Or somebody's saying something. Maybe, I don't know. I got a thumbs up. That's what it is. All right. Best place to start for a first-time weightlifter? I would say in the gym. I would also say to go to a coach within wherever you are, because you want to make sure that you're learning technique first. If you're a first-time weightlifter, using moderate loads is going to get you the training stimulus that you want because you have a training age of 0 in the weight room. On the bike, you may have a training age of 10, i.e. you've trained for 10 years, but you still may have a weight training age of 0. So if that's the case, you want to make sure that you got eyes on you to make sure that you're doing things correctly, making sure that you're getting good feedback during that session. That way you can make changes, but moderate loads in like 50 to 70% are going to get you a training adaptation as you get better and better, stronger and stronger over the course of a year. Then you can start to push those loads even further and further, but you can ride the like minimal increases for continued gains for as long as possible. It's fairly linear for somebody who's relatively new or a complete beginner, and just ride that till the wheels fall off, because then you're going to get the most out of it. And then after that, that's when things can get more complex. Oftentimes I see lifters or people who are new to weightlifting or weight training, they try to get too complex too soon, and then essentially you burn the matches too soon. So you've used these overly complex ideas that are made for more experienced and advanced training. And once you get into that, you can't go backwards. You're not going to get the gains out of doing things from being a beginner. So now you have to continue. You've essentially preemptively lowered your ceiling, which none of us want to do. So yeah, take it slow, make continuous gains, get eyes on you. That would be my recommendation for a new lifter. Good alternatives for squats. Someone coming back from a knee injury. Good one. You can do, it really depends on what the knee injury was or is. As if it's a tendinopathy or like you have patellar tendinopathy, it's essentially pain and swelling within the knee tendon. That's going to be one thing. If you've got meniscus damage and you physically can't squat, that's another thing. And so it may be limiting the range of motion at which you go. So maybe half squats, you have no pain, but full squats, you have pain. So use pain as your limiter or your moderator. If that's a no-go, then if it is a tendinopathy, then you want to make sure you get that taken care of. So working with a physical therapist or something along those lines. But generally, you should be able to shorten the range of motion and still get a strength stimulus. You should be able to load up more. But either shorten the range, you could go to a single leg thing like a step up or a split squat. Sometimes sitting down to a box, that can help, but that's again just limiting the range of motion. If all of that is still painful, you're definitely going to want to see somebody. But you can also focus on the posterior side of things too, and things like hip thrusts or barbell RDLs or conventional deadlifts. Those are all things that are going to strengthen the lower body as well, but have a lot less knee bending and more hip hinging. So it's something you can do, but I would start with just limiting the range of motion and work on some unilateral stuff. Squats aren't the be all end all. If you can't squat, it doesn't mean you can't be fast. It's just we like to do that. If you have access to a leg press and that works, single leg press, two-legged leg press, those are both highly effective, and the single leg press is really effective for cyclists because it's pretty much the joint angles that you're looking at being on a bike. You're just lying on your back instead of it's essentially the rubber side's up. Hopefully that answers your question. If you're person who asked that one, if you have further questions, happy to chat more. I'm also just going to put that up too for other questions if people want. What exercises can we do if we don't have access to a weight room? It's a tough one. I think we kind of went over it already. As far as like, what can you do without, if you don't have access to resistance training equipment or heavy weights, jumps, med ball throws, heavy gears on your bike. If you don't have access to a weight room, I would ask why you don't have access to a weight room. Because they're everywhere. So I don't think that that's an excuse or a reason not to be in a weight room. But if there's other issues, like, it can be unnerving or intimidating to go to a weight room, and it's totally valid. Or maybe you're scared because you don't have any idea like you've never been to one, so you don't know how to lift or how to start. And those are all valid feelings. And so I would suggest talking to a professional coach. But weight rooms are everywhere, whether it's a rec center or a private gym or, whatever the case may be, there's somewhere that you should be able to go. And if it's a time issue, because of work or kids or family or whatever the case may be, then you have to look at prioritizing different things and seeing if it is a priority for you. But I would suggest it's a priority for everybody from a health standpoint, and from a performance standpoint, it's definitely highly effective piece. So I would reevaluate versus thinking that there is no weight room around.
Kevin in chat asked a great question of how extreme can you be with heavy gears on the bike? I chimed in that Velobike does make a 9-tooth cog if you want to go that crazy. But is the maximum effort under 50 RPM insane?
Andrew, you're the bike coach.
I would say no. I'd say there's a time and place for everything, but like there was once upon a time where I was doing standing starts up a hill in the biggest gear I had in my bag. If you are going to do that, please make sure you are choosing a safe road/hill to do that on. But yeah, you can think of playing around with the velocity thing on the push band and figuring out exactly kind of what cadence it is. It tends to work out about 20 to 30 RPM. So you can think about that of, if you're able to find some sort of hill where you can put on a gear and consistently be charging up the hill till failure between 20 and 30 RPM, I think that would be a great sort of effort to mimic what we're talking about.
You'd definitely be getting a heavy strength adaptation off of that. Remember, you're going to be neurologically fried after that.
Yeah, and then you got to turn back around, go down the hill, and stop yourself at the same place you started. So you do the concentric then eccentric bit.
Yeah, lots of research coming out on that too. So
use a lock ring.
Yeah, smart. Is there any others in the chat there?
No, I think we should go back to the spreadsheet.
All righty. I think somebody was testing out the spreadsheet because I have SDF, SAFD. Was that you?
No, it wasn't.
So the next one I've got, what kind of strength programming do you recommend for enduros? Eat more weights. So the strength program that I would recommend you do is the one that you'll do. So again, it doesn't have to be magical. You just have to do it. There's no right prescription or wrong prescription necessarily. There's going to be a wrong prescription, but there's not a specifically correct one. There's many roads that lead to Rome. There's many ways. If you look at the start line of the men's Kieran or women's Kieran final, or if you look at the start line for the points race at the Olympics, because there's more riders than that. You've got 20 riders on the track. There's probably 20 different ways that people got there. So to say that there's a right way to do it or a specific suggestion, I can't give you one, but I would say that you should start if you haven't already. I would suggest that you do lift weights as an endurance athlete. It is certainly going to help and benefit your output as well as reduce the risk of injury through the season. If you do happen to crash, it's going to build some armor for you to land on. Yeah, the biggest thing is it's going to increase your efficiency and output on the bike.
So I know from like your chat last week that, we talk a lot about sprinters doing under 5 reps per set, usually in that kind of 0.5 to 0.75 zone for velocity. For an endurance athlete, would you go up a band in the velocity, or would you stay in the same band, maybe try to add some more reps to the higher end of the band, or how would you approach that differently?
Yeah, so from an endurance athlete perspective, I often get asked about higher reps, whether that's on the bike or running or elsewhere, thinking that the sport is endurance, so we should train with more. And it's a good question, and I understand the thought process behind it, but remember, my job is to fill the gaps in what they're not getting. Sometimes to facilitate what they should be getting, or to emphasize in a sprinter's case the speed and power output. But from an endurance side of things, what they're not getting is the strength side of the spectrum. They're very much on the endurance side of the spectrum. They get lots of volume and repetitions. And so how I can help benefit them is by giving them that strength stimulus, that thing that they don't ever get on the bike. Even if they're pushing big gears up a hill on a climb and it's a slow climb, it's still not strength oriented, and it's still within the same circle of the pedal stroke. So I would still I've got a picture of Maggie. Those of you not familiar with Maggie, she's one of Canada's top female endurance athletes on track and in road. And her strength is probably more similar to Andrew's strength than what anybody would think. Or, I mean, your numbers are different, your outputs are different, but Maggie still works within similar zones because I need her to get stronger. And that adaptation zone, or that speed strength zone, or the accelerative strength zone, is what it is. It just depends on how much weight you can push on that day. So the weight's almost irrelevant. We just load it up as much as we can to put you in there. So whether it's a female athlete, a smaller female athlete pushing X amount of weight, or whether it's Andrew and his size pushing his amount of weight, the adaptation that both of you will get is similar, and we're trying to elicit for both of you that strength adaptation. So the rep range is going to be relatively similar. It's still lower reps, higher weight. It's still moving fast relatively. And then some of the accessories are going to be similar, but I may start to do more like higher rep stuff in some of the accessory work for an endurance athlete. But I mean, I even make you guys do some pretty high rep stuff in some of those small, shitty, poor, less fun exercises. Um,
Yeah, one thing I always like to say when we do track classes and stuff is most races will end in a sprint, whether you're a sprinter or an endurance rider. So having some sort of snap is never a bad thing.
no, everything comes down to usually 1% of the race. So maybe 2 to 3%. So, but nonetheless, those are all indicative of pretty big power outputs. What do we have there?
Oh, Peter just needs more long solo efforts. That's all.
All right. At what point do enduros have to be concerned about strength to weight instead of absolute strength? Good question. As stated earlier, though, both sprinters and enduros even, it's not about the absolute necessarily. It's about the relative strength output. So the strength to weight ratio is very important for both sets of riders. Obviously, the endurance side, there's, you've got climbers if you're on the road, and stage races and longer races, on track. Power is still very important, and strength is going to be important. So I would say getting relatively stronger is always the goal, even for the endurance athlete. Time of year is going to be where you focus on different pieces, though. So from the weight room side of things, though, we're generally trying to get relatively stronger. I don't need to make you a big fat power lifter. That's not the goal. The goal is being stronger in what you're doing. So absolute strength isn't necessarily what we're chasing. Sorry. The relative strength is what we're chasing. Make sense? Any questions on that one? No?
Yep.
Last one that we've got so far is, how should a pure sprinter approach lifting compared to a distance track athlete or track cyclist? Sorry. So yeah, from a pure sprinter approach, the emphasis in the weight room is going to be a lot greater. You're going to have more volume in the weight room than an endurance athlete, simply because we're leaning more towards the absolute strength side of things. You've got to be able to push a much larger gear and faster. So strength is going to play a huge role in that. So again, from that perspective, we're going to increase the volume in those in those main lifts. So if we're using squats or deadlifts or split squats or leg press, we're going to sit in that same sort of rep range, that lower rep range. We're going to use velocity as a cutoff to say, okay, the nervous system's toast at this point. I don't need to increase my volume past this point, as now I'm getting diminishing returns, but I'm going to build out as much volume as my nervous system can handle, and go from there. And then we're going to have a bunch of accessory work as well, probably more volume there as well at certain times. But then once we get into season, there's going to be more of a focus on that explosiveness and taking, say, arbitrarily 80% of your max and moving that load faster and faster and faster. As again, that's going to relate more strongly to on bike stuff. But the volume off the bike is going to decrease, just like an endurance athlete would. the thing is, it's probably going to be more towards what the endurance athlete was doing in the off season. The sprinter is going to do that sort of load in season. So you may be down to 2 times a week in season. Some of the accessory work might go away, might be solely focused on some of the mains. We will always want to keep some of that general prep stuff in there, because that's just helping us with durability and helping us in moving in ways that we're not doing on the bike. So, you know, opening the back up, doing some back strengthening work, making sure the hammies are still getting some work on them, because there's not a lot of emphasis on that on the bike. But the big thing is the outputs are much higher, volumes can be higher, because we are trying to at times increase mass as well on the for a sprinter compared to an endurance athlete.
Well, that's all the questions we have so far. This has been a lovely 90 minutes, which I think is about the max that we wanted this thing to go. You know, just if anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to say thanks, Kyle, for sitting down with us and having this chat. I think looking at least through the chat logs, it seems like it's been very helpful. A lot of people, I think, have learned a lot and got to ask a lot of important questions and learn a little bit more about strength training. Tyson says thank you. But yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully, oh, there's something.
Oh, that's a good one. Besides deadlifts and squats, are there any other lifts that definitely need to be in our arsenal?
Yeah. I would suggest some heavy unilateral work. So if you have access to a leg press, single leg press, if you don't have access to that, then split squats are a big one. I often use, Andrew, do you have a safety squat bar or no? It's just a barbell.
No, I just have a barbell.
Okay. So I'll use a straight bar if that's what you've got. And do split squats or reverse lunges with those. And I'm emphasizing more weight on the front foot. So like 60% load on the front foot, and even shooting the knee forward more so it's over the toe. You're still keeping that front foot flat on the ground, but by pushing it forward and just shifting the weight forward a little bit, we're emphasizing more torque through the knee joint, which is going to be more relatable to cycling and quad development. And step ups, similar sort of idea. The step only needs to be 12 to 16 inches. It doesn't need to be massive, because again, we want to think about the joint angle that we're going to be at the top of the pedal stroke, where we're starting to kick over and then start to put torque in. That's where we want to generate force. So those two, if you have a safety squat bar or want to invest in a safety squat bar, that's one where you've got handles that come in front, bar sits on the back, but you've got kind of a pad that goes around your neck. I like using those. Our gym has a bunch of them, but we'll actually hold on to the squat rack and lift ourselves out of the bottom. This is a way that we can overload and put more weight on the bar, but use like a handle or the J cups or a safety, the safeties to lift ourselves out of the bottom. So we get that stimulus of a heavier load than what we could lift without it. So I call those a Hatfield split squat, but they're a hell of a stimulus in my mind.
Andy wants to know if there's anything we should do with our arms or just enough strength to hold his body in his aero tuck.
Yes, upper body, often neglected by cyclists. Yes, lift with your upper body. By doing the lower body stuff and squatting and deadlifting and whatnot, your upper body will get stronger, but you can help increase the strength of your lower body by just creating a stronger upper body to hold and maintain that weight. So it's your standard stuff: bench press at different angles, overhead press if you have the shoulder mobility to do so. If you don't, you
Oh no,
do some dumbbell work or use a landmine and press kind of out in front. And then pulling, lots of pulling, both horizontal and vertical. So cable rows, dumbbell rows, pull-ups, chin-ups, assisted, whatever you can do. Those are all important things.
Kevin wants every day to be leg day, but it should be noted that generally we do the legs first in these sorts of sessions. So, you're nice and already somewhat fatigued by the time you get to your arms. So the legs are definitely the priority lifting block.
Yeah. But it's less neural fatigue in lifting with the upper body than the lower body. So that's why another reason why we put the upper or the lower body first and I do the upper body second is it's I start with the high neural output stuff first. So you're jumping in heavy weights or Olympic lifting first, and heavy with the lower body, and then heavy with the upper body, and then accessories and core work afterwards. So I just keep going down the chain.
So Stan, who's a former triathlete, thinks he should swim, run, then bike.
Swim, run, then bike.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That would make more sense. But see if you can get the race organizers to figure that one out.
There you go. All right. Well, once again, thank you for doing this. I'll work with Khyl to get a good list of those velocity-based training systems together, and we'll throw it in the Facebook group and also throw it in the Discord to make sure that if people want those sorts of tools, we'll be able to provide them with the good resources to find out where they can get those sorts of tools. In the meantime, thanks everybody for showing up, learning a little bit about strength training, and good luck to everybody with the New Year's resolutioners in the gym over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and thanks to both of you for putting this together.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I hope everybody learned something. Keep your elbows up in the gym with those New Year's resolutioners.
Great, I can get Kieran training and strength training in all at the same time.
Yep, absolutely. I didn't tell you that though.
Right.